Hello, long time no see. A quick book review for you today. I want to talk about The Girls by Emma Cline. This will be published by Vintage in June of this year, so about 2 months away. I know that's a little while, but it is available to pre-order, and I just tore through this book and I really wanted to talk about it while it's still fresh in my mind. Emma Cline is a young American writer and this is her debut novel. Beautiful. So this is a work of fiction. It's beautifully written and it's intended for adult readers, and although it doesn't make any claims outwardly anywhere here, it has a lot of ties with Charles Manson and the family. This book is set in the summer of '69 and there are a lot of parallels between the reality of what happened that summer and what happens in this book. And because I have a sort of ongoing interest in the family and how that came to be and how that came to be this just horrifying thing and how that mentality was born, I sort of found it quite difficult to read this book without thinking about that. But let's just jump into a little bit of history. So Charles Manson, who is still alive in prison, is now in his 80s, in 1969 was a much younger man, and he was enigmatic and intelligent, I suppose, or charming, sort of drew people towards him, and he was a wannabe singer-songwriter. The family were his followers, mainly young women, but people of all ages from different backgrounds who followed him, and it began in the house of one of the Beach Boys, interestingly, Dennis Wilson. They lived in his mansion, about 20 of them, with Charles Manson, these mainly young women at the time, I think, before moving out to a ranch in California. That happens in the book. We begin at the ranch, but a lot of the girls make reference to time they spent living with a really wealthy musician called Mitch. I suppose to anybody reading about the family, it just appears to be hippie culture. They sort of rejected materialism. There was a lot of petty crime in that they would shoplift things and they would take food from dumpsters and eat like that, and it was sort of branded as a type of environmentalism, I suppose. And also lots of drugs, lots of LSD consumption happens in the book, happened in real life. Good. The youngest member of the family was a teenage girl called Diane Lake, who was 14 in 1969, and I believe Charles Manson talked about her as just the perfect embodiment of what he wanted all these other young women to be. She was the purest and the emptiest, I suppose, and it's really interesting. I don't think people know too much about her because she was so young and she wasn't involved with any of the murders, so she just went and lived a normal life, and I assume is still living a normal life. But it is interesting to think of her the youngest, because Evie is the first person protagonist of this book, and in the beginning Evie is a woman in her 60s, I'm gonna say, who's spending a bit of time in the summer at a beach house of her friends, and she looks back on her youth that summer in 1969 when she was 14 years old. And the other real person I want to mention is Leslie Van Houten, who was 19 in 1969. She committed murder, I believe, in the second set of murders that the family committed, and people were really fascinated by her because all throughout the trial in the court case she absolutely refused to place any blame on Charles Manson or to admit that she had been under his influence, that she had committed these things because he told her to or because she worshipped him. She really rallied against that idea. I'm not sure in total how many people who were connected to the family are still in prison, but I know that a lot of them received parole maybe 30 years ago and other people have died and that kind of thing. But Leslie Van Houten gets a lot of press and is still talked about a lot, and it's all just really fascinating to me. The week before I received this book, I was reading an old interview on Brookie. I'd been reading something that had just been published, and then it said like a recommended, you might like this, and it was an interview with John Waters, the director, and it's just about creativity and his life and being an outsider. But then he starts to talk about Leslie Van Houten because this interview took place in, I think, 2012, and at the time he was campaigning to have her released from prison, and that was the following year, and that all happened and she wasn't released. But it was really interesting to me because he talks directly to the young woman that's interviewing him and basically says that if if you were in her position at the time, you being a young woman who maybe doesn't have a perfect life, you would have done exactly what she did. And a lot of people agree with him that LSD and being under the influence of this man and being so young don't really warrant the fact that a woman in her 60s is still in prison and has spent her whole life there. So she's really interesting in the context of this book because Suzanne is the girl. She is the one that catches Evie's eye when she's running around barely dressed, stealing food from dumpsters, and she's just so appealing and so different to Evie, and Evie is just completely drawn towards her. And she's a little bit older. I think she is about 19. So yeah, I really just wanted to hinge my thinking of this book on that idea that it could have been me, it could have been you. And I think that's a big part of this book because, how to talk about this without spoiling it? It does follow a narrative quite similar, like I said, to the Charles Manson case, in that you learn quite early on that Evie is an adult woman who in her adolescence was involved with this group of people who lived on a ranch. The narrative then takes you back to that summer, and she has just had a falling out with her best friend. She's not really getting along with her mom and her mother's new boyfriend, and so she's vulnerable. She's young and she's having her first kind of interactions with boys, and she just really easily slots into this new life. She leaves her kind of comfortable middle class, very safe, predictable life behind, and just within the space of a month has completely surrounded herself with these fascinating people, and she's taking the drugs they're taking, and she's doing the things with this man named Russell, just like all the other girls are doing, and just so quickly and so easily slots into this new life. The friendship between the two girls, between Evie and Suzanne, is really highly charged, really sexual. This book is about the girls. It's about female friendship, female sexuality. It's not about how Evie fell under the charm of this singer-songwriter Russell who promised her the world, although that is part of it. The reason she's there is constantly Suzanne. It's Suzanne. They kind of drift in and out of one another, and she wears Suzanne's clothes, and they feel like they really know each other in the same way that everybody at this ranch feels like they really know each other. And it's sad. There is a sadness to it. There's a nostalgia to it. It's that classic thing of looking back on the summer that was sort of the bridge between who you were and who you became, and it was that summer of possibility, but in this way a really dark, terrifying possibility. And Evie as an adult is looking back on that summer and thinking about what could have happened, and she tiptoes in this really interesting territory between regret and gratitude, I suppose. Just being grateful that she didn't incriminate herself, that her life didn't sort of end at the end of that summer, in one sense, but then this terrifying kind of seductive regret that she didn't go all the way. I really like the adult Evie when she's narrating the chapters that are kind of in the present day, and she has a brief friendship with a young teenage girl who comes to stay at the beach house. Her name is Sasha, I think, and Sasha sort of acts as a reflection of her younger self, but she's also sort of repulsed by her. She's repulsed by the relationship that Sasha has with her boyfriend. She's constantly repulsed actually by a lot of men throughout the book, I think. And she's drawn into Sasha sort of in the opposite way. I think it's quite sad actually how she's 14 for many of these chapters, and then she's 40 years older for the rest of the book, but those intermittent years she sort of gives you a quick overview of what happened in her life, but it's sort of like you don't need them, because you can tell that the summer in which she was 14 is pivotal. That's the story you need to hear. And then the version of Evie that you meet as an adult who's narrating is just kind of still trying to understand that 14-year-old and feeling very distant from her teenage self, but then being able to retell this story with terrifying clarity. So yeah, I think Evie the narrator is looking back on that summer, and she's trying to understand herself. She's trying to understand teenage girls. She's still, I think, trying to understand her sexuality, And there's regret and there's sadness, and there's some just incredibly beautiful writing in this book. And Emma Cline just fully kind of immerses you in this beautiful hot Californian summer, and gets you inside the head of this 14-year-old, and where the adult Evie is able to see where her younger self kind of got swept in and all these false promises by this singer-songwriter. She also justifies a lot, and you find yourself justifying it with her. I just love this book. I would really recommend it, and thank you for listening. It's out in June. Bye!